Hello and welcome to another Blu-ray review, and this time we're going to be looking at a set that encompasses three films, the first three films in a very prolific series from the 1960s and 70s in Japan, directed by Teruo Ishii, and this is part of the Masters of Cinema series and covers spy numbers 285, 286, and 287. The set is Prison Walls. Abashiri Prison 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to say it again, but I absolutely adore this artwork. This is such a great piece from the great Tony Stella. The chains coming down there, the is it black and white? The kind of monochrome image there of Ken Takakura, and then the color. I just really like the contrast and the white background going along with everything, but also the fact that you get images from all three films, and I just think it's a great piece, one of my favorites I've seen in a long time from Tony Stella. So this looks great, and I was very intrigued to dive into these films, having become kind of a fan of Ken Takakura from a couple of releases from last year from Eureka, like The Bullet Train and Golgo 13. But to see three films out of a series in which Ken Takakura plays Shinichi Tachibana, a kind of young Yakuza member who ends up striking down a boss and goes to jail, the titular jail of Abashiri Prison. Although we'll get into the films in just a second, but and I'll hold off on the original title. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover each film in a separate video. So this is a 2-disc set. The first film is on the first disc, and the second film was also on the first disc. The third film was on the second disc along with the extras. So I will talk about the films only, but maybe mention the commentaries, because there's the commentary track for each film with different commentators on each, which is a really cool touch, I thought. So you don't get any repetition. And then the third review of this set, I will talk about all the extras, get into the packaging, and kind of round off this full look at the Prison Wall set from Eureka. So let's get to the first film, which was released in 1965, as were the first 4 films in the series. The first 10 were directed by Teruo Ishii, and then there were a further 8, which were the new Abashiri Prison series, which also starred Ken Takakura, who ran that role of Shinichi Tachibana into the ground. So this is something that wasn't too uncommon in East Asian cinema, Japanese cinema, like the 60s and stuff. You could look at a series like the Blind Swordsman series, the Zatoichi films, which with Shintaro Katsu, and there were 25 of those in a very relatively short span of time. And Abashiri Prison, or the Abashiri Bangaichi series, was no different. 4 films in 1 year. They were cranking them out, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the future videos, because this was the first one. So Abashiri Bangaichi is the first film, and that kind of translates to Abashiri, which is a place, and there was, I don't know if it's still operating, maybe not. There was a prison in Abashiri, and it was actually a prison that was initially, I believe, from what I remember from the commentary, was there to house samurai, to imprison samurai who had rebelled after the shogunate regime was turned over to go back to an emperor reigning system in Japan. And so the samurai, the retainers, they were kind of jailed and put in Abashiri, which is in like one of I think it's the like northernmost point of Japan in the island of Hokkaido. Very cold in the winter and stuff, and a lot of those samurai died because of those conditions, or because they tried to escape and were executed. So an interesting historical story behind that place. But Bangaichi is a word that is kind of can't really be fully translated into English, but it's kind of like in the middle of nowhere. I think Jasper Sharp kind of puts it in one of the pieces on the Blu-ray. Off the grid is kind of a way to kind of summarize Bangaichi as a word, but Abashiri Bangaichi is kind of like prison in the middle of nowhere. And so we follow this character of Shinichi Tachibana, played by Ken Takakura. As I said, he struck down a Yakuza boss, and he's now in this prison along with a whole bunch of other people. And you have like 9, I think it is, 8 or 9 prisoners. You get to kind of know a fair amount of them pretty well. And that, for me, makes it a really enjoyable film. I like the prison movie genre because you you just get a group of characters who you can make wildly different, and you give them all an edge because they've done something, either really horrible or, maybe not horrible, and then you have to play as an audience member with like, how do you land with the morality of all of these people, and do you judge them all with the same, the same coin, the same token, or do you have, and I like the way that can evolve over a prison movie as well. And it raises interesting moral dilemmas as an audience member, because you can have someone who's a rapist or a child killer, or you can have someone who just, I don't know, dodged tax or something. So and I guess that depends on whether it's like a high security prison. I mean, there's so many variables to that, and there's so many prison movies. But in this one, you kind of set up at the beginning this sequence where these guys who are going to be in the same cell together, they're introducing themselves to each other, I should say, and it's, well, how many years do you have in this prison? And it's kind of like a notch of respect and stuff. And there's an old man called, actually, I want to see what his name is. There's an old man, and a great character, who in the first film doesn't have a whole lot to really say or do, but really leaves an impact. And he's played by an actor called Kanjuro Arashi, and he's kind of sitting there in the opening scene, kind of not saying anything. And they're like, "Oh, who's the old man?" And then he just very matter of factly states the fact that he has like 21 years on his sentence, and suddenly everyone bristles like, "Holy shit, this is the Don," because like, what did he do? So I like that kind of dynamic between these guys. And this is shot in like gorgeous black and white. I really like the way the film looked, and this was something that actually was budgetary in purpose, not artistic. And so, this was made at Toei, and it was actually part of a double feature. There was another film that was starring the actor Koji Tsuruta, and he was seen as more of a star than Ken Takakura. So his film, as part of the double bill, was the more, it's shot in color, but the more bankable version. And this Abashiri Bangaichi was the black and white B side to that, and that would be like the second half of the double bill, which they didn't have as much faith in, or to put as much money in. But also the fact that there's no women in the movie, so there's no like romantic kind of storyline for Ken Takakura, and so they didn't want to put color into the film. And Ishii, the director, was not too happy about this, but eventually he realized that shooting in Hokkaido for real and all that snow, it would look black and white anyway, pretty much. But it suits the feel of the film, I think, and it comes off as an artistic choice. But the reality is it was a commercial choice. But I love the way that the film looked. The only criticism I have really of the film in general, I think, is that you never really, for me, get a sense of the prison. They shoot outside the real prison at the beginning of the film when they're driving up on the trucks, but once they go through those doors, it's just the inside of the jail cell. And then you see the prisoners out on kind of like a chain gang kind of work detail out in the woods, in the snowy kind of harsh conditions, chopping down trees and producing lumber, and that's it. You don't see them going. I don't know. I just feel like the building, the prison, the facility. I never got a feel of the geography of the place, and so for that, it felt like something was missing. And I feel like a lot of great prison movies, they set up the geography well for the audience, so you kind of have an understanding of where things are. But considering the fact that this story involves an escape plan, the escape plan isn't really about escaping the prison. It's about fleeing once they're out on the chain gang kind of, work detail in the woods. So I guess I understand that, but I would have liked to see more of the prison itself, I suppose. But the characters, I think, are really well defined, and the most memorable outside of our lead star is probably Gonda, played by Koji Nanbara. He is a slimy piece of work. And from what I understand, he was kind of like, I don't know if he's like a heartthrob or anything, but he played much different roles in his career, and this is not the typical kind of type that he would play. But I just think he looks so dirty and unkempt, and that there's something about his like smug laugh that I just find so grimy and like detestable. And so he did a great job, I think, as this this really antagonistic kind of character who's just needling Tachibana, and ultimately the crux of where this film goes is, and they say that it's from the Defiant Ones, with Tony Curtis and Sidney Poitier, where you have two prisoners chained to each other and they escape, but they hate each other and they're chained together, and it's kind of a fun friction kind of filled device to put two characters together and just see the sparks fly. And so when Gonda is the one who kind of pulls Tachibana with him against his will to flee, it just makes for a really cool third act. But I really liked everything about the film. I just was engaged in the characters. And Ken Takakura, this guy, I feel like he must have been by the age of 4, like already just pulling up the collar on his shirt and just like shrugging off everything. Like he's just effortlessly cool. How ironic that I flubbed saying the word effortlessly. But it's true. I feel like he just exudes that kind of charisma that you cannot teach. You've either got to be Clint Eastwood or Paul Newman, or Ken Takakura to really pull off that kind of, I don't know, there's just something about him. And so he's this kind of stoic, cool, calm, kind of steely guy. And when you throw him in this prison with people who are very outlandish and and then you have Yoda. There's a character in the film called Yoda who is also kind of antagonistic character who is played by the great Toru Abe, who's just like such a great villainous kind of actor. Like he's in the other two films as well, the two sequels, and plays villainous roles in those as well. And he just really pulls off that kind of, it's not the sleaze that Nambara brings to Gonda, but it's a kind of a smarminess and kind of I don't know, a self-righteousness. I don't know, he's really good at playing that kind of he holds court in that group of prisoners, and he does it very well. And right from the beginning, he kind of lays claim to being the boss basically of this group, and tells all these stories of how important he is and everything. So there is a really satisfying moment when he gets put in his place and you just see him kind of shrivel a little bit, and you realize maybe some of his stories were just that, stories. There's a great moment where Yoda really asserts his dominance in that kind of core group of the 9 prisoners. We see the other prisoners kind of in the background a few times, but not much. But we really just laser focus down to these 9 guys. But they're out in the wilderness and they're chopping wood and stuff. And one of the prisoners has found a little cigarette butt. There's maybe a few puffs left on it, and he's kind of sneaked it away and made sure that the guards haven't seen it. And Yoda's like, well, hang on, I'm in charge here, so I get the first puff. And so he hesitantly hands the cigarette butt over to Yoda, who just proceeds to kind of gleefully just smoke the entire thing while everyone else is kind of watching with envy. But it's just such a great kind of distilled moment that shows us and shows those characters that he's the one running the show, and just really sets him up perfectly, even more than his introduction, I think. Really good scene. So I really enjoyed his character in the film too, and there's a couple of goofy characters and stuff, but really it boils down to this this escape and the run, basically, the chase that ensues of the people who work at the prison trying to find these prisoners who are on the run. And Gonda and Tachibana are at odds with each other, of course. And I just found that really engaging. And there's a really, really interesting sequence where they're hiding in like a mine, I think it is, and they need to kind of sleep for the night. And it's really cold, it's snowy and everything. And Gonda's like, well, we need to we need each other's body warmth and stuff. And so he starts rubbing Tachibana, and this is like, this cool guy, and he's like, "You don't get off me," he's like, "No, we gotta keep ourselves warm." And then he tries to kiss, Ken Takakura, and he pushes away, obviously, and then Gonda's just laughing about it and stuff. But I find that really intriguing because what's that film, Midnight Express? I haven't seen it in well over a decade, but I remember there being a kind of a gay love scene, I think it was, and it felt really realistic, and it feels like men probably would, just to get some kind of intimacy after so long, they would turn to each other. And so I love that little touch, which I was not expecting at all in a film like this. And it is just a kiss, but it was a very kind of charged moment that I found super interesting. And I do think that this is a really good film that I really, really enjoyed. But the last 5 minutes make it a great film for me. And I won't spoil what that is. I try not to go into too much of the kind of final details of these films, of the the final moments of the plot or anything. But I think that there's a choice that is made in the end, and there's a great scene where they need to kind of break the chain between them, and so there's a train coming down the tracks, and they've got to decide who's going to be the one to lie in the middle of the tracks and who's going to be the one on the outside of the tracks. And the way that plays out, the tension of it, the suspense and the building, and the editing, the cinematography, it's beautifully done. Like it's perfect. And just the final moments, I think, which also involve another character who's kind of Tachibana's parole officer, played by Tetsuru Tamba. Now, I see Tamba and I see Tanba with an N or an M. Every single time I see his name, it's written differently. I have no idea. We'll just go with Tetsuru Tamba, who, I mean, if you watched any, if you've watched at least a couple of Japanese films from like the 50s or the 60s or the 70s, you've seen this guy. He's in everything. And he's a really good actor. And he plays the parole officer of Tachibana, and he's trying to actively get him out of prison. This is another big part of the film, is that Tachibana's mother is sick. And so he's kind of desperate to get out, and he wants to get parole. And he's really pushing for it. And then now he's getting enlisted by some of they're trying to enlist him, the other prisoners, to be a part of an escape plan. But he doesn't want to ruin his chances of getting parole and getting to see his mother before she potentially dies because she's very sick. And so the stakes for Tachibana of getting out of prison are huge. And you feel that, and you get flashbacks to his youth and as a child, and the rough upbringing he had with a stepfather and everything, and when he ran away from home and went to the city and stuff. And so I feel like it's so well built in that kind of the flashback sequences. You see Tachibana frequently get put into solitary confinement, and that's when you slip into the flashbacks. But right near the end, there's just a really interesting moment that brings about questions of really like the human psychology of bad people who do bad things. And are they then worthless? Or should you try and save them, And so, I don't want to spoil it. Maybe I kind of already have, but I just think that the parole officer character as well. And there's another great sequence. There's a chase scene on these rail cars, like these hand kind of operated rail cars. And it's just a fucking incredible action sequence where, Tetsuro Tamba is chasing after Gonda and Tachibana. And I just thought I was just like on the edge of my seat. It's just a fucking great sequence. But the parole officer, he's tried so hard to help Tachibana, and now he sees right near the end that he's tried to escape anyway, not knowing that he was pulled against his will by Gonda. So I just love that. That's such a good kind of dramatic pull, where you want to just scream out to Tamba saying, no, he didn't do it on purpose, and he's like, I'm gonna kill that, And there's more to it. There's more reasons why the parole officer is enraged with Tachibana, and that's part of all the little things that happen across the film. I think this is a great film. I really loved it. But yeah, the last 5 minutes, I was like, wow, that's a choice. And that makes it so much more interesting and adds a lot of layers to Tachibana's character, I think. So that, for me, really rounded off the film into being a great one. I loved this. This is one I'll go back to again and again. It just really captured a feeling of prison life, even though you don't see the prisoner, like I say, but I just feel like the dynamics between the prisoners, and actually the scene where they try to kind of set motion their escape plan is brilliant and so unexpected, and I love the way that played out. I think you also see them in a workshop, and you see them bathing in a kind of production line almost, which is kind of an interesting visual idea. But I just feel like the actual building itself I didn't get a real handle on, which is a very minor thing. But again, I just feel like the closing moments, and I guess I'll talk about it at the end, because I guess I want to dig into it just a little bit, and I'll do a spoiler warning. But just to round off the first film, there is a commentary for the first film with Tom Mez, and I love his commentaries. I just think he adds so much to the films that he's talking about. So like last year there was like Samurai Reincarnation and The Fall of Akko Castle, and I just love those commentaries so much. He just knows a lot about Japanese history and ties that into the film history in a way that I get kind of carried away with. I love all those stories. He talks about the samurai that were initially imprisoned in Abashiri. So I really loved hearing all of his insights into, and it isn't really a scene specific commentary as much as it's just a talk on some of the actors, on the director Teruo Ishii, who's known as like the king of cult and would go on to be defined by films a lot more attention grabbing perhaps than the Abashiri Bangaichi series, like The Joys of Torture, a series of films he made about methods of torture over the years in history, which don't sound too appealing to me, but he certainly was known for more graphic films than this. And he talks a bit about how there are little flashes of Ishii's kind of flamboyance in some of these films. But I really enjoyed Tom Mez's commentary on this, and I feel like I could listen to him talk, read the phone book, and I'd be engaged. So that wraps up the first film. I would highly recommend it, and obviously as part of the set, you kind of have to get the set with all three films, I suppose, but purely based on that film alone, I would recommend it, and the Blu-ray. It looked very good. The transfers on all three films are pretty decent, nothing mind-blowing, but they are restorations, and they look very, very good. And for films from the 60s, it really is just great that we get to see films in this kind of high quality, and I certainly appreciate it, especially when I've never heard of these films. They just was never on my radar, and so that's just another thing I love about collecting, about the Eureka label, about a lot of labels that release these kinds of films I've never heard of before, and I go, oh, that's interesting, and I watch it, and I love it, and, of the three films, this is by far my favorite. I think it's a great film, and I will just briefly then here at the end talk a little bit about spoilers. So right at the end, they get on the train tracks and they break the chain, and Tachibana resigns himself to the fact that he's going to have to be the one to lie underneath the train, and Gonda won't allow it. But ultimately, Gonda is the one who gets injured, so it's kind of a fun twist there, where he tried to literally kind of throw Tachibana under the bus, or in this case the train, and he ended up being the one who got hurt because of it, and he kind of gets wounded really badly, and he falls down this hill in the snow, and now they're free, and so Tachibana, he can leave and go see his mother who's dying. But the cruel twist, of course, is that his parole officer had just got word that his mother had recovered in hospital, and that his parole had been confirmed and had been approved. So it was just such a cruel twist of fate that, it's kind of simple, almost manipulative story tactics when you're writing a film, I suppose, but, I was hooked into it. I was like, oh no, like, not audibly out loud, but like inside I was like, oh fuck, So I liked all the little twists in the story like that, but as Tachibana is leaving, Gonda's there like dying in the snow, and he calls out to his mother. And we've the whole film is set up that Tachibana he's a mummy's boy, and he relates to that primal need for your mother. And he realizes that Gonda at one point was just a boy who wanted his mother, and that he's a detestable person, but underneath all of it, there is that that innocence is still there somewhere. And so he decides to try and save him, and ultimately they both get caught by the parole officer and, presumably go back to jail. But I just thought that elevated the story so much, and so yeah, that was the brilliant touch on the end of the film. So that's pretty much it. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for part 2, where I'll talk about the sequel, which was rushed into production very quickly. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.